So what I want to do is describe a series of studies that we did a few years ago to try and analyse the extent to which girls' and boys' environments are separated artificially, and to look at some of the long-term impacts of that separation in adulthood, and try to apply that to some of the ideas we have about stereotyping. So, first of all, I better give you some information about what stereotypes are. Now, there's a few psychologists here, but a lot of people who don't have a background in psychology as well. So, just to give you a bit of background, stereotypes, from a psychological perspective, are just the body of knowledge that we have about a social category. So we all belong to lots and lots of different social groups. So I am female, I am born at a certain time, I am Scottish, I am vegetarian, I am academic, I'm all this bunch of things. I belong to numerous social groups, as do all of you. And each of these social groups has characteristics and behaviours that are associated with it, just through cultural associations and experience and practice and exposure to messages that come through from our culture. So that might include things like knowledge about particular character traits that are associated with that stereotype. It might be personal memories, it might be visual images that you associate with them. That body of knowledge is what we would call the stereotype. Now that's slightly different from our attitude towards stereotype groups, which is prejudice. So if I have an attitude towards a group that is informed by the stereotype rather than by information I have about an individual, then that attitude, be it positive or negative, would be a prejudiced attitude. We probably all have a very similar understanding of what is included in various stereotypes, but we might have very different attitudes towards these social groups. So if you think about gender specifically, I know that particular characteristics like warmth and nurturing and ironing are associated with the female stereotype, whereas different traits like ambition and aggressiveness and strength and football are associated with the male stereotype. I know these things, and these things are stored together somewhere in my brain, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I endorse the viewpoint that all men and women have to share these characteristics. Does that make sense? Okay. So, the research that I want to share with you is through looking at these gender stereotypes and where they come from, but particularly focusing on this colour-gender association, because it is so random and so artificial and yet so universal. The first thing we did in the series of studies was to try to measure or quantify just how pervasive this pink-blue thing is. So we got a couple of the most popular catalogues, mail order catalogues, and just analysed the contents of goods that were available for children. So we looked at clothing and we looked at toys. And we found that with the clothing, for clothing that's aimed at young children, babies and infants and young children, about 50% of the items were actually pink or blue. So the consumer choice was quite limited. So the majority of clothes were available in these sex-typed colours. When we looked at the toys, that was even more interesting because they're split into boys sections and girls sections. Now I know this is a bit of a theme at the moment because, as I've said, I've seen some newspaper articles suggesting that some retailers are actually trying to take away that labelling. But in this catalogue it was divided into boys' toys and girls' toys. So obviously as a consumer your choice is already directed in a particular way. For the boys' toys there was some spread of colour. Remember they have things like army green trucks. There was still more blue than any other colour, about a quarter of the items were blue. For the girls, the colour saturation is much more prominent, so more than 50% of the items were just pink. That is what girls have, pink stuff. And 97% of the pink items were in the girls' toys sections. So I was kind of surprised that it wasn't 100%. But the strength of colour-gender association that is promoted to young children and to the parents of young children, the consumers of young children's things, is fairly split. So does this impact on young children's cognition? Well, we wanted to see whether young children internalised these colour-gender associations, to see whether they had beliefs about what other children would like based on these associations. So we asked them to fill a room full of stuff for a boy and a girl. We gave them a picture of an empty room that had neutral flooring and white walls, and we gave them some objects that they could put in the room. We asked all the children to do this for a boy and for a girl, and it was 3 to 5 year old children, so quite young. For each of the objects, which were things like a bed and a rug and a table lamp and a teddy bear, we gave them a choice of 4 colours, so they had pink or blue or green or orange, and they could just pick up the item and put it in the room. And we then just coded how often the different colours were selected for the boys and the girls. And as I'm sure you can anticipate, there was quite a strong colour-gender association in these young children. So they tended to think that the boys would want a little bit of a spread of colours, but mainly blue. So more than 50% of the objects chosen for the boys' room were blue. For the girls' room, it was 90% of the objects that were pink. And I think that 10% mainly came from one participant. A bit of variation. So the young children had really internalised this idea that regardless of what they wanted for themselves, a little girl that they didn't know would want pink, because that's what little girls want. So it tells us, these first couple of experiments just quantify a little bit what young children's environments are like. They tell us that young children's environments are very much split into these pink and blue spaces, and that young children internalise that association so that they have a belief that that's what little girls and little boys like. So, does that matter? Where does it matter? It's a very innocuous cue. Who cares if there's pink and blue? We were interested in seeing whether these sort of colour cues could go on to have an impact on adult cognition, to see whether we could get stereotype priming based on these kind of associations.